Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning for protecting your data in 2018 in a ransom-filled world. A few housekeeping items we'd like to just go over very quickly. We've muted everybody, so we won't get to hear your favorite dog or music or some inter-office things if you have to step away for a minute. However, there is a chat window available that you can ask questions, or a question window that you can ask questions, and the moderators will answer them. If it's just a generic question, we will save those till the end of the presentation. So stay with us so we can get all of your questions answered. We will have a couple polls in there, and we ask that you just interact, quick click, and give us some feedback so it can help our presenter just make sure that we're answering and catering the presentation topic a little bit to the folks that are with us today. And contact information will be provided at the end of this webinar, how you can follow up, or if you would like to have some follow-up. There will be a survey and a recording that will be distributed after that you'll be able to come back and listen to. Should you like, or share it with another person that you think should listen to it in the future. So LambTech is our major partner here today that is presenting and working in conjunction with our partner, Doug. So Doug is from LambTech. He is an account manager. And Doug, maybe you can just tell us just briefly a little bit about LambTech.
Sure, thanks, Pete, and good morning to all our different people that are joining us here today. We do appreciate your time and joining us on our webinar today. We're going to get a chance to partner with Datto to bring you some of the latest information to help you learn about protecting your business against ransomware, and also just providing some good business practices for your business continuity. As you talked about, a little bit about LambTech. It was started in Sedalia by our owner, Robert Lamb. Initially started in 1999. He still serves as our CEO today. We have grown to a staff of about 20. Our core region that we cover goes anywhere from Kansas City to Columbia, up north to the Chillicothe area, down south to Springfield. However, we do have locations in several other regions that we also assist. LambTech provides IT support for businesses, and we align our IT solutions with your growth initiatives. We take care of technology so that you can focus on expanding your business and stop expanding on your day-to-day problems. We do have several components that we have within our full managed IT services, and just to briefly talk about those is we work with security for your email, computers, making sure that you can log in from different locations. We also do help desk support that's available 24/7 for the most part during the core business hours. But we also have those emergency after hours. We also do consulting and make sure your future is planned for. And then the service that we offer that brings us to our topic today, which is data recovery and backup services. And again, we partner with Datto for almost a decade to provide additional safety of your records and provide a true business continuity plan. And we're going to have the opportunity to learn about the latest in ransomware and how you can protect you and your company from data loss and breaches. We now have our channel development director at Datto, Michael DePalma.
All right. Thank you very much. Just get the controls turned over. So just to get started, my name is Mike DePalma. I do channel development for a company called Datto. We are a backup and disaster recovery company based out of Norwalk, Connecticut. Essentially, my role is to go around. I do a lot of presentations, really all over North America. I have been lucky enough to sit on some panels with the FBI, Department of Homeland Security. So I've heard some of the stories that they've been telling about what's going on out there in the industry. For those of you not familiar with Datto, like I mentioned, we're based out of Norwalk, Connecticut, about 40 miles east of Manhattan. We did celebrate our 10-year anniversary last year. Pretty cool story for the entrepreneurs in the on the webinar. Our CEO, Austin McCord, is 32. So you do the math. He started the company when he was 22 years old. Started building these devices by hand in his parents' basement, actually. Fast forward about 8.5 years to 2015, we got a $1 billion valuation from the Wall Street Journal. And that, it's a testament to data, but it really is also a testament to how much the business continuity space has grown. We're up over 1,400 employees worldwide. We do work with strategic partners all over the world. And so obviously LambTech is one of those strategic partners of ours. And as was mentioned, they've been a partner of ours for 10 years. And so, it's been a great partnership. We have 9 data centers around the world, 2 here in America, 1 in Salt Lake City, Utah, 1 out in Reading, Pennsylvania. We protect close to 400 petabytes of data in those data centers. It's actually one of the largest private clouds in the world. And so for those of you not familiar with the size of a petabyte, the kind of data that we're talking about, most people understand the size of an MP3 file, right? If you have 1 petabyte of MP3 files, you could play music continuously for about 2,000 years. So that's 1 petabyte. So it is one of the largest private clouds in the world. And I'll get to the importance of those strategic locations in a little bit. I will say that I do a lot of presentations up in Canada. First question I get asked is, hey, you're not sending our data down to the States because they don't trust us or our government. So we actually have 2 data centers up there as well. The idea is obviously to keep the data in the country it originates in. And so for all the US-based clients, all that data is to those 2 data centers. And so really, one of the things we like to talk about is just rethinking backup in general, because for the most part, people over the years have viewed backup as just this kind of last insurance policy. My building burns down, there's a flood, crazy storm, at least I have a second copy of my data somewhere. And that's really, especially in the small to mid-sized business community, what most folks have. And the problem is that the criminals are exploiting that because there's some limitations to that. We still see folks all over the world that are still using, external hard drives. They're still using tape backup, really prevalent still to this day. And then, folks have been moving off site to the cloud, which is great. You've got a second copy of your information, different geographical location, and that's great. But again, it's just that second copy of your data. It's not something that's going to keep your business up and running, and not something that's necessarily going to prevent you from paying that ransom if you are hit with ransomware. And so, some of those limitations that these criminals are trying to exploit is they know most of these traditional backup solutions, especially the ones you can just go to the store and buy on your own, they have higher failure rates. I mean, the failure rates of tape are pretty staggering. We're seeing, different reports of anywhere between 30, 40%. And so, if you are hit with ransomware, your server goes down, there's a good chance that you're going to try to restore that data and it's not going to be viable, or if it is, it's going to take a really long time. Manual testing as well, and that's just not just manually taking the backups, but is there somebody manually testing those backups? A lot of folks that I talk to in the business community, they don't even know how often they're testing those backups. But the point here is the more users and the more real people you get involved, the higher the risk of user error, right? So you want to take the manual taking of those backups and the manual testing out of it as much as possible. This next one is the one that the criminals exploit the most, and that's slow recovery time. If you are using a cloud-based backup and it's your only backup solution, you should really run a test on that and see how quickly you could restore that data. You could be looking at, if you've got a couple terabytes of data and you're trying to pull that down from your cloud backups, you're looking at several days, if not weeks, to pull that down, depending on the solution you have. And so the criminals know this. They know most people are backing up their data, but they also know it's going to take you a really long time to get that data back, and that downtime is a real piece of leverage that these folks have. And then risk of infection or theft. A lot of the more inexpensive backup solutions that are out there, they are at a higher risk of infection or just straight theft. I mean, if your only backup solution is something that's in your office, obviously there's a risk of somebody breaking in and taking it. We've seen some creative ways these criminals have done that, but a lot of folks will have their backup on an external hard drive and they'll have their IT person bring it home with them. And so there's a risk of a theft there, or the folks leaving in their car. So there's obviously a bigger risk of that when you only have your backup in one particular place. So business continuity, which is the business that LambTech is in and how we support them, it kind of looks at things a little differently. Obviously, you're backing up the data, backing up whatever servers you're looking to back up, but there's some more key components to it. The first being, you do want to have a hybrid solution. I mentioned our 2 data centers, but essentially the way the backup solution would work is you've got an on-premise device that's backing up whatever servers that you're asking it to, and it's automatically replicating to those 2 data centers. So now you've got 3 copies of your data. Somebody in the IT community years back told me, no matter what solution you're looking for, and you're evaluating, assume it's going to fail. What happens when it fails? And so your server goes down, what happens? You've got the on-premise device. Okay, what if something is wrong with that? Well, now you've got a second copy of your data out in Pennsylvania. Okay, God forbid something's happening out there. Well, now you've got a third copy of your data on the opposite side of the country. So multiple copies of your data, different geographical locations is key. You don't want to have your only backup solution in-house, and you don't want it to be just a mile or two down the road, because if you do have one of those disasters, even though they're rare, you have a risk of impacting both your office and that backup. You want it to be automated. I mentioned having manual testing. An automated system is going to be much easier to handle. You set your schedules for as often as you want to take those backups, and they're going to happen. And if there is some sort of failure, we're actually automatically testing those backups automatically as well. We're going to test that the data is there, and we're also going to test the virtualization capabilities, which I'm going to get to in a little bit. And if there is any sort of failure in any regard, that's where LambTech steps in. They're going to be able to address that problem and be proactive about it, instead of being reactive and finding out, hey, our backups have been failing, we haven't been testing them, now we actually need them, and they're not viable. An image-based solution is another very key component, probably the most important component of a business continuity solution. And it's a very important concept to understand. So instead of backing up just the files and folders like most traditional backups do, an image-based solution actually takes an image of the entire server. So not just the files and the folders, but actually the operating systems, the applications, everything that lives on that server is going to be replicated to that on-premise device, and then subsequently go off to those two data centers. And so what this allows us to do is make sure that we're not missing any volumes. But the way that the backups occur is actually a little bit different as well, and it actually helps when you're looking at protecting yourself against ransomware. Most regular backup solutions are going to be layered upon previous backups. So if you're infected, there's a risk of those infections occurring in your backups as well. With an image-based solution like ours, what we do is we take that initial snapshot, you set up your schedules for how often you want those backups to occur, and we've got a proprietary piece of technology called inverse chain technology, which means that every one of those backup points, if you're backing things up hourly, you're going to see every one of those backup points, they're all independent of one another. So if you're hit with ransomware, it's truly as simple as just rolling back to that last clean backup. There's no risk of it impacting previous backups. So that's very critical. And so you really want to look into that. And then lastly, virtualization capabilities. You want to be able to virtualize, what this means is your server goes down, you could spin up a virtual machine right from that on-premise device. And so everyone that was operating off of that server is now going to be operating off of this on-premise device as well. And so it's actually going to be acting as your server. So it's obviously going to reduce that amount of downtime. So I think we're going to pull up our first poll question, which folks can see. Okay. Get that up, it'll get that up. So please, answer as best as possible. And, we're going to have a couple throughout the presentation. All right, so it looks like there's a good mix in there. Okay, a couple more seconds. We'll give some folks, looks like just about everybody has answered that question. All right, so we've gone over kind of the difference between traditional backup and business continuity. Looks like got a third of the folks are still on traditional backup, about half are on business continuity, and again, another portion just aren't sure, which is great, which is one of the things we're going to cover here. So hopefully we get that going. All right, so we close out that poll. Get back to the presentation. Okay, so when you look at really what's going on out there in the world right now, we're really seeing a huge uptick in variants of ransomware and the prevalence of ransomware. Ransomware has actually been around since 1989, so we're looking at close to 3 decades of ransomware. But for years, for the first few decades, we might see it pop up every now and again. You might see it in the news, but it really wasn't prevalent. And then we saw in 2013, we really saw a spike in ransomware. And really, it's a pretty simple delivery system that these guys use. Most of these folks are getting in through emails, and they're not trying to steal your data. They're just trying to encrypt it to make sure that you don't have access to it and that they know, hey, we know you'll pay to get it back. And so all of a sudden in 2013, we saw this huge spike. And what this screen is showing you are the more prevalent forms of ransomware. Most people are familiar with CryptoLocker. That was the most prevalent one back a couple years ago, and that kind of became synonymous with ransomware. But now the FBI estimates there's close to 4 million variants of ransomware out there. And so people are always asking me, okay, what's the government doing? And they could probably put a lot of resources into shutting down one of these ransomware variants, and then they'll get a nice pat on the back and a nice news story, and then they've got 3,999,000 to go with new ones popping up every few minutes. And so really what happened in 2013? This is a virus that's been accessible to these criminals for several decades now. What really happened in 2013? Well, what we saw really was that these criminals latched on to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's been in the news a lot lately, especially over the last several months when we saw the price really skyrocket. But again, Bitcoin's been around for several years. And it's kind of created in this utopian idea that we're going to have this currency that's not going to be influenced by governments coming in and artificially inflating or deflating this, federal banks. It's going to be a currency that truly is going to be dictated by the market. And it's going to be completely anonymous, so governments can't step in and try to do things. And the problem was criminals really latched onto the anonymity of it and said, okay, well, hey, now we could deal in really huge amounts of money and without any risk of being looked into or caught. So initially, people were on the dark web using Bitcoin for some really bad things, weapons and drugs and those type of things. But the folks that were behind the ransomware really figured out, hey, we can marry this Bitcoin boom that we're starting to see, and we could marry that with our ransomware. And now we know that we could deliver this ransomware virus out to the masses, and we know we're not going to get caught because we're going to ask for it in Bitcoin. And that's what they've been really doing over the last several years. And then it's been very difficult for any of these folks to be caught. And so we've seen such an uptick in it. And the impact of the ransomware epidemic right now is truly widespread. It's estimated that about $1 billion changed hands between July 1st, 2016 and July 1st, 2017. $1 billion changed hands between the business community and these criminals. But the impact that the FBI has estimated to the business community worldwide is closer to $75 billion. And so what makes up that difference, right? The $1 billion in actual Bitcoins that are being exchanged, what makes up that difference? Well, that's because this includes the cost of data loss. Only about 75% of the people that actually pay the ransom get any of their data back. A quarter of them never see any of it back. And within that 75%, they might get a little back at a time. You see some of these criminals that'll say, okay, thank you for the down payment. Now to get all of your information back, you have to pay me another few $1,000s. And so that downtime is actually far more costly to the business community than the actual ransomware payments. And so I mentioned, some of the leverage that these guys have. This screen right here really dictates what this leverage it really looks like. If you're looking at the left-hand side of the screen, you're looking at RPO. And I know there's a lot of acronyms in technology. The two I want you to take away from this webinar are RPO and RTO, because the criminals are intimately aware of this. And so your RPO is your recovery point objective. And essentially, how much data are you at risk of losing at any given time? Comes down to how often are you taking your backups. If you're taking weekly backups, then you're at risk of losing a week's worth of data. And depending on your business, the industry you're in, that might be okay. But the goal is to figure out exactly what's acceptable to you. And so, we could do backups very often, but the problem with your RPO is if you're not testing those backups, then you have no idea whether or not that backup is valid, and you can't answer that RPO question. You could say, hey, we're taking hourly backups. We've never tested them. You get hit with ransomware. You come to find out your backups have been failing for 3 weeks. Well, now that RPO star has just jumped from an hour to 3 weeks, right? So, a lot of folks have good backup solutions. Maybe you are testing them. That's great. You've taken away that left-hand side of the screen. You've taken away one of their legs. The second piece of leverage they have, and the second one is the reason why most people pay, is that downtime. So that second acronym is RTO, Recovery Time Objective. Essentially, how long would you be down if your systems will go down for whatever reason, whether it's a ransomware attack, server failure, whatever it is. Most businesses never test that, so they can't answer that question. If you're using a traditional form of backup, a lot of times you're talking about days or weeks before you get all of your systems back up online. And I've got some real examples of that. But that piece right there is the very costly piece. And that second piece of leverage is the piece that the criminals latch onto. And so they know that most people can't be down for several days. There's some studies out there that show a company that's down, especially small businesses that are down for a week or more, 74% of them are out of business within a year. Criminals know that. They know that they have that leverage, and that's why so many people pay. And so, okay, we're going to get to the next poll question now, poll number 2. Peter's going to pull up. So, how much downtime? Where are we looking at here? So you guys can answer that poll if you can. I mean, if you're not sure what that looks like, then, just say, I don't know. And a lot of people don't know. That's why, it's important to have, a company like LambTech come in, do an assessment, and make sure whatever RTO you have is aggressive enough for your business. It changes for everyone. You can't say across the board that, okay, everybody needs an RPO of 1 hour and everybody needs an RTO of 2 hours. Everybody's different. So that's why you come in and you do that assessment and, you kind of figure it out. So it looks like, a lot of folks are looking at a couple of days. A lot of people don't know, and that's completely fine. That's why we do these kind of educational webinars. And so we'll give a couple more seconds to make sure that everybody's answered. Looks like we're pretty close to that. But again, when you start looking at this, this is the main piece of leverage they have. And I'm going to end the webinar in a little bit, but with a couple of really good stories about what that cost looks like, what makes up that $75 billion number. All right. All right. So, it really is no longer a question of if, but when. We did a ransomware survey. We've done one in 2016. We did one in 2017. Actually, the largest ransomware-specific survey of its kind. And we surveyed 2 groups of people. We surveyed managed service providers, so folks like LambTech all over the world, and then we surveyed the small business community as well to kind of get a gauge of what we're looking at here. And of those managed service providers, 6 and 7 reported folks that lost data. They had clients that had gotten hit with ransomware, 6 and 7. So just about all of them. Most of those folks were victimized over the last couple of years. We did this study starting in July 1st of last year, and we found that 6 and 10, 60% of them had clients that were hit in just the first 6 months alone. So it's a pretty staggering number. That's the number we're looking at. There's a number out there that says 1 in 20 businesses around the world were hit with ransomware. Now you might look at it and say it's 5%. And that's 1 in 20. You could look out your window and you could see 20 businesses, and one of those guys have been hit with ransomware. So, and it's only growing, and that's really what we're looking at. And what's interesting is, I mentioned the $1 billion number. 709 million of that came from the small business community. And when we looked at the average payment that these small businesses were paying, it was around $2,000. All right, so it shows you that these are the folks that these guys are going after. You might read about the hospitals and the municipalities and all the universities that are hit, but the vast majority of the folks that are hit are in the small business community because they're the ones most susceptible. And when you look at the $2,000 number, look down at the $709 million number. Try to break down $709 million into $2,000 increments. Think about how big that net is that they're casting out and how many businesses are not only being hit, but have no other recourse but to pay. It's a pretty staggering number. That really shows you what they're doing. And then again, I mentioned some of those impacts. 57% of those small businesses that we surveyed that were hit reported data loss. Those are the folks that maybe didn't want to pay and they tried to restore and couldn't restore all of their data, or did pay and didn't get all their data back. But again, 75%, 3 in 4 of these businesses reported business-threatening downtime, enough downtime where it's hard to keep their doors open. That's the piece of leverage that these criminals are looking at. And lastly, I'm going to talk about this stat. And there's a lot of stats, and if everybody wants to see the entire survey, we can get that out. But this one, to me, was pretty surprising. Again, I mentioned we did a survey in 2016. And at that point, 88% of the managed service providers that we surveyed were highly concerned about ransomware. That ticked up to 90%, but again, these are folks that live and breathe this every day. We did the survey and we looked at small business owners in 2016, 34% were impacted. Now, we saw a lot of stories over the next 12 months, including that big WannaCry attack that hit in May that was on the front page of every paper. I thought this number would skyrocket. We did that after we did this survey after WannaCry hit. It only ticked up 4 points. Less than 4 in 10 business owners are highly concerned about ransomware, despite the fact that it's $1 billion a year industry and it's only growing. And that's why, the criminals love stats like this, because they know they can keep attacking these folks. And that's why we try to do as many of those surveys as possible. And so we looked at, the first poll, and we said, okay, a lot of folks do have a backup solution. Almost every company I talk to is backing up their data in some regard, but they don't have a business continuity solution, and it's hard to try to figure out what that cost is. And again, it's going to differ for everybody on the call, but you got to try to figure out, get your head around, okay, if I'm down for a day, what does that cost me? Right? They got two pieces of leverage. You have a good backup solution. Even if you have that, you take away that left-hand side of the screen, as I mentioned, but the downtime, that right-hand side of the screen, is the really costly piece and the one that they typically use when they're asking for that money. And so I'll give you two examples. One is is San Francisco Metro Transit Authority. They got hit with ransomware on Black Friday a couple years back, and they got asked for $73,000. And to their credit, they came out immediately and put out a statement, said, yes, we were hit with ransomware, we were asked for $73,000, and we have no intention of paying it. The government recommends that we don't for several reasons. You might not get your data back. It puts a bigger bullseye on your back, and also emboldens these criminals. But secondly, they had a very robust backup solution. They knew they can get their systems up online. They just had to figure out how long it would take. Now, they huddled their IT team together, and they said, all right, how long are we going to be down? Because the issue for them was the systems that went down were their transit system fare terminals. So they weren't able to collect fares from their light rail or their bus system. So their IT team got together. They said, we've done tests. We could answer this. We could tell you that we'll be back up and running Sunday morning. So now they're facing two options. They're going to be down for 2 days. What do we do? Well, the first option is to shut down the light rail and the bus system on the two busiest shopping days of the year, which really wasn't an option. So they went with door number two, which was, we're going to give away free rides for 2 days, two busiest shopping days of the year. Great, right? Everybody in San Francisco loved it. And then you didn't see many news stories after that, right? It was, they got systems back up on running, not a big deal. They never announced how much money they lost. But fortunately for me, I'm able to go to their website, get a lot of information off that website and do the math for them. All right, so they're down for 2 days, Friday and Saturday after Thanksgiving. On their website, they say that they provide 735,000 rides every single day. I would estimate that those numbers are higher on those 2 days, but let's just take their numbers. It doesn't break down how many of those folks ride the bus or the light rail, but I do know that a bus, you can get on the bus for $1, you can get on the light rail for $2.25. So for them being down 2 days, they lost anywhere between $1.5 and $3.3 million in lost revenue. They could have paid the $73,000. Instead, they decided to go with just restoring their backups. Took them 2 days, and the actual cost to them was several million dollars. And that's where that $75 billion number comes from. That's the math that most criminals want you to do. Now, they could absorb it. They're the San Francisco Metro Transit Authority. And if not, most small businesses cannot do that. Most small businesses don't have the ability to keep their doors open if they're down for several days. I did a presentation in New York City about 3 weeks ago, and actually the head of the cybersecurity unit for the FBI gave a presentation right before me, so that made me nervous because I'm like, I hope all my statistics are right. But he's told this same story, and he said, gave all the same statistics, except he didn't do the math. He talked about how they were down for 2 days, all the impact, and he said, I don't know how much money they lost, but I could tell you that it had happened here in Manhattan, and they were down for 2 days. Well, we would lose $50 million a day. It would have been a $100 million impact. So even the FBI understands this. This is how they're talking to folks. Their big push now, because they know they can't catch a lot of these guys, is to educate. And so their education is the downtime is the real key. The downtime is the leverage that these criminals are using. And so that's an example of me and the FBI doing some math. I want to leave you with an example of a third party actually justifying the cost of ransomware. And I actually heard this story last fall. I was on a panel, and there was a gentleman up there talking about cybersecurity insurance, about whether you need cybersecurity insurance, right? And, it's a topic for another day, but he told a story about this utility company out in Lansing, Michigan. When I heard the story, we got off the panel, and I picked his brain about it. And I said, I'm going to steal this story from you if you don't mind. And he actually sent me a bunch of news articles. And so what happened with this utility company was they got hit with ransomware, and they were asked for $25,000. And they had a very robust IT team. They had 51 folks on their IT team. So they spent a day trying to say, okay, we can get all of our systems up online without paying this ransom. They spent a day trying to do that. After pulling their hair out, they came out and said, we really have only one recourse right now, and that's to pay the ransom. So they paid their $25,000. Problem was these criminals didn't give all of their information back right away. And even when they did get their data back, they had to go in and wipe their servers clean, and they had to go install new operating systems and all the rest. And so at the end of the day, it really took them a full week. Even though they paid the ransom, it took them a full week to recover. They estimated they lost around $2.4 million. Now, they had cybersecurity insurance, so they put together a claim justifying the cost of their downtime. And so when they looked at that $2.4 million, $400,000 of that was worth of just them upgrading all of their systems, making sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. So they couldn't include that. $2 million of that was the actual cost of downtime. So they submit that to their insurance company. The insurance company reviews it, and they come back and they cut a check for $1.9 million. In my experience with most insurance companies, I actually used to work for an insurance company, they don't like to pay on claims that aren't real. They looked at this and they justified the fact that, yes, the cost of downtime for them to be down 1 week was $1.9 million. It was actually $2 million. There was a $100,000 deductible that they had to absorb. And so he told the story with like, hey, this is why you need cybersecurity insurance. I looked at this story and said, hey, if these guys had a business continuity solution, they wouldn't have had to pay the $25,000 in ransom. They wouldn't have to spend $400,000 upgrading everything to make sure it didn't happen again, and they wouldn't absorb wouldn't have absorbed that $100,000 deductible. And as I kept digging into this story, because I was fascinated by it, I found an article about 6 months later, and it was an article that stated that 25% of that 51-person IT team had left the company within 6 months. They weren't fired; they just couldn't stand the environment. It was a toxic environment. Everybody was pointing fingers. It was way too stressful, and they left. So not only did they have to absorb all those costs, they had to go out and find a whole group, about a dozen new IT employees to backfill all the folks that had left. And, it's not like there's a lot of really qualified IT folks out there. So the ripple effects were huge. And so, again, he mentioned that this is why you need cybersecurity insurance. We will pay out based on downtime. Well, I'm telling you, they are justifying the cost of this downtime. This $1.9 million obviously far exceeds the $25,000 that they paid, and this is what feeds into that $75 billion number. And so with that, I think we're going to, continue on and just talk about that epidemic, how business continuity fits into that. Now, remember when we talked about the virtualization aspect of things, right? If your server's now hit with ransomware, you get that scary red screen that anybody that's been hit with ransomware knows, and says, click here to pay me my money in Bitcoin. Since everything that lived on that server lives on that on-premise device, it's just a phone call over to LambTech. They could spin up a virtual machine right from this data device and to get you back up and running. This is now going to be operating of your server. And it's not just saying, hey, the data's there. It's a true production environment. You're able to make changes to all of this data that's on there. And you could be up in a virtualized state for a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, however long it takes you to either replace that server or wipe it clean. And then whenever you're ready, you could do what's called a bare metal restore and get all of that data onto that new piece of hardware, which will include all the changes that you made while you were in that virtualized state, and get you back up and running, not to where you were when you were hit with ransomware, but truly to where you were right when you're ready to do this restoration. So now you've taken off that right-hand side of the screen, that downtime. Right? Think about if either one of those examples I gave you had a business continuity solution and they were able to get their systems up online right from that device. And so the benefits of this are clear. You're reducing the downtime because the downtime is the really costly aspect of this. This is the difference between intelligent business continuity and traditional backup. It's going to help your RTO and your RPO that I've been talking about, because you're going to be able to answer those questions. That RPO piece is going to be answered pretty definitively, because not only you're going to set your schedules, I mentioned we test our backups. We actually have what's called screenshot verification, which means that we don't just test that the backups are there. We actually spin up a virtual machine every night in the background, bring it up to a boot screen, take a snapshot of that, email it off to LambTech. And so they know not only is the data there, all these cool virtualization capabilities that are on the screen have been tested as well. All right. And then your RTO, you're going to be able to test this as well. You're going to be able to test these capabilities. Everybody's got different environments, right? Everybody's got multiple servers, virtual environments. We could back all that up, but we're going to be able to tell you, hey, if you're going to be down for, a couple hours, 30 minutes, you're going to be able to answer that question. But again, you're going to reduce that downtime from days or weeks to minutes or hours to get all of your systems up online. And then lastly, you have the ability to do that either locally from this on-premise device or from either one of those data centers. So even if this on-premise device is compromised, maybe it's not a ransomware attack, maybe it is one of those disasters. Well, now you have all these capabilities out in Reading, Pennsylvania, or Salt Lake City, Utah. So really, no matter what's going on around you, you've got your data, and not just your data, you have the ability to keep your business up and running. The big test for us, I mentioned we're right on Long Island Sound in Connecticut, was Hurricane Sandy a few years back. This was when we were still a growing company. A lot of our clients were on the East Coast, obviously. Hurricane Sandy comes out, wipes out basically the entire eastern seaboard up there. We had thousands of businesses of all shapes and sizes living out of our data centers, operating out of our data centers for weeks as their server rooms were drained out and new racks were put in. And we were able to say at the end of the day, not only did we keep these businesses up and running, we didn't lose a single piece of data from anyone impacted from Hurricane Sandy, and that allowed us, got us great press coverage. So the ability to do that locally and from the cloud is very key. And so with that, we have one last final poll before we get to some Q&A. If Peter could pull that up. So after reading this, how do you feel? How do you feel about what you have right now and whether you're protected? So you could chime in there. And again, even if whatever you have and you're protected, I think it's really worthwhile to reach out and have LambTech come out and just do an assessment of it, right? Just make sure that whatever you have is adequate. Try to get your head wrapped around those RPO and RTO numbers for your company. That would be the first thing I would do after this webinar, see if you could answer those two questions. And then the harder part is try to figure out, okay, what does that cost of our RTO? Okay, we know we'll be down for 2 days, 3 days. Can we quantify that? And that's going to be the math that these criminals want you to do. So we got a few more seconds of this, and then we will bring it on. And again, if, as was mentioned at the top, if you've got any questions, you could just type those into the chat box. Obviously, we'll get to as many as we can. We've got some time for that. And then if you have any questions afterwards, obviously reach out to LambTech, and they definitely can answer that. So with that, I want to thank everyone for their time. I know everybody's busy. And so with that, I will turn it over and see, Peter, if we've got any questions coming in.
We do. We do have a couple questions. And so the first one, Michael, is what is the typical time frame you've seen from recovering from a traditional backup?
That's a great question. Probably the question I get most often. And most of the time I'm asking that question to small businesses so that I could answer it. And I could tell you if it's just a cloud backup, you are normally, and depending on your data size, obviously, but for most small businesses that have, 1-2 terabytes of data, you're looking at a week or more to recover all that data. And a lot of the cloud backup solutions will say, hey, we could speed that up at a cost, at a price. Obviously, tape backup, you're lucky if you get your data back, and if you do, you're still looking at a very long time. And then if it's, external hard drives or all the rest, you're looking at several days. Very few of the traditional backup solutions are going to get you back, and anything under a day.
Okay, great answer. Thank you. The next one is, what is the government doing to go after cyber criminals?
Probably the most frequent question I get, and like I said, I've been lucky enough to sit on a couple panels and present with a lot of these folks, and they'll be pretty bluntly honest. They'll tell you, you get hit with ransomware, there's not much we can do. We're not going to be able to unencrypt this data, and it's very unlikely that we're gonna catch anyone. So what they've kind of done with their resources is they've put a lot into education. That's why I've been able to sit on so many of these seminars with these folks, is because they're going out into the field trying to educate the business community, because that's the only way they're going to combat this stuff. They can't stay ahead of these criminals. These guys are 2-3 steps ahead of the IT world, and they're very advanced. It's an actual corporate type structure. You got to get it out of your head that it's a guy in his basement doing these hacks. This is organized crime now. This is what organized crime's doing all throughout the world, because there's so much money to be made, billions of dollars to be made, with very little risk of getting caught. And so the government really sees that the way to combat this is through education, and make sure people know what things they're supposed to be clicking on, what things they're not supposed to be clicking on, what websites they should be looking out for, and then ultimately making sure that you recover. They'll tell you you've got two options. You pay the ransom, and there's a lot of risks to paying the ransom, or you recover from your backup. That's what they'll tell you. And so the type of backup you have is very critical.
So there's a really, really interesting question here that seems very basic, but how do I know whether my data is protected?
So I would go back to testing it. Who's testing those backups? And then trying to restore. Actually doing a test of the restore, to me, is the best way to do it. Actually testing it and saying, okay, here's our data, whatever you want to do it. If you want to do it weekly, monthly, quarterly, try to test that backup. I mentioned, we test it daily, but if you've got another solution in there in place, have you ever actually tried to restore that data. That's the only way you know that all that data is viable, usable. You know, all these things you're going to say, hey, I could look at this external hard drive, I could see all, you know, how much data we're using and all that stuff. But have you ever tried to restore? It's going to give you a good answer to that question.
Okay, we have one more in here, and certainly, you know, the cloud is always a topic of where things are and all that. But the question is, how much data can I keep in the cloud?
Great question. And it's really, there's a lot of different options. You have an option to keep an unlimited amount of data in the cloud. Now, I mean, the cost of keeping data in the cloud has come down, and so you have the ability to keep unlimited amount of data in our data centers. You also have options of just 1 year retention. That was probably the most popular option of the last few years, which is, it's called time-based retention. You're going to keep an unlimited amount of data for 1 year, and then the old backups are going to start pruning off on day 366. So it really depends on how much. If you've got some compliance things, if it's HIPAA compliance or other compliance where you might need to keep the data for longer, you can keep it up there for as long as you want. And that's where you reach out to LambTech. They're going to analyze it and give you the options. But you've got those options. It's either going to be, you know, 1 year time-based retention or unlimited cloud option, and you just go from there.
Okay. I don't see any more coming in. We're just wait a second here to see if anybody else has any other questions that they want to put in. And I don't see any. So for the sake of time, Michael, I want to thank you for joining us today and presenting this great topic, and great education, as you said, is key. If there are any additional questions, or you want to know more, or you, as you said in the couple polls that we posted that you didn't know, LambTech is a great place to start with gaining an understanding. So Doug's contact information at LambTech is on the screen, has been for a couple minutes here, doug@lambtech.com, or the phone number right there, and you can give Doug a call. That's his direct dial, and email him directly, and he will get back to you to set up a time to chat with you, or right when you call in. We thank you all for joining us today, and have a look for future webinars from LambTech. Thank you.
Thank you.